Good evening, and welcome to News of the World. It's Saturday, August 8th. Tonight we drift slowly across 28 countries, from Timor-Leste to Peru. There's nothing you need to do and nowhere you need to be. Settle in and let the world turn. Timor-Leste, the young nation on the eastern half of the island of Timor, has launched its first international subsea cable, a quiet milestone that means more than the technology itself suggests. For years, this country of about 1.5 million people has relied on limited connections to reach the wider internet. Data has traveled through older routes, slower and more vulnerable, and the simple act of loading a page or making a video call could feel like asking the sea for permission. Now a cable runs beneath that sea, linking Timor-Leste more directly to international networks. It is the kind of development that doesn't make noise. There are no towers rising against the skyline, no visible structure to point to. What changes is something felt in small moments: a student in Dili joining an online lecture without the connection dropping, a doctor consulting a colleague overseas, a family abroad hearing a grandparent's voice clearly for the first time in a while. Timor-Leste has been building itself steadily since independence, and infrastructure like this is part of that longer, patient work. The cable sits on the ocean floor, doing what cables do, carrying light through glass, carrying meaning through light. And for a country that has often had to make do with borrowed routes and second-hand capacity, having its own line out into the world is a small but real form of sovereignty. If you're still with me, you might think of it as a thread laid quietly across the seabed, not much to look at, but holding more than you'd guess. Canada finds itself at the table again with its largest trading partner, working quietly to avoid a new round of tariffs that could land hard on both sides of the border. According to sources familiar with the matter, Canadian officials have been discussing trade concessions with Washington, measures that might include lifting restrictions on American alcohol and meeting other U.S. demands in exchange for relief from threatened duties that have been reported as high as 50%. It's the kind of negotiation that doesn't make for dramatic headlines but shapes millions of livelihoods: factories, farms, port workers, small businesses, all of them waiting to see which way the wind blows. And behind the diplomatic maneuvering, Canada's economy has been showing some quiet resilience. The unemployment rate fell to a 2-year low of 6.4% in July, helped by the creation of 75,000 new jobs. That's not a boom, but it's a steady pulse. Meanwhile, scientists have been studying the conditions behind this year's devastating wildfires, concluding that climate change played a real role in creating the dry, hot landscape that fueled them, a finding that sits alongside political arguments about mismanagement but rests in the end on data and evidence. If you're still with me, it's worth noting that for all the noise around trade and climate, Canadians are also still doing ordinary things: hiking the trails of Glacier National Park, watching young hockey players face Finland in the Hlinka Gretzky Cup semifinal. The country carries its worries, yes, but it carries its pleasures too, and holds them steady through the night. Indonesia has always been a country that holds its place quietly between worlds, an archipelago of thousands of islands, sitting at the crossroads of the Pacific and the Indian Oceans. These days, that position is drawing fresh attention. Indonesia is intensifying its defense diplomacy, deepening ties with neighbors and partners as it navigates a region full of emerging challenges. It is a measured approach, less about spectacle and more about steady relationship building, the kind that often goes unnoticed until it matters most. Beyond security, Indonesia is reaching outward in other ways. The state of Illinois signed a trade agreement with Jakarta to expand economic cooperation, a small but genuine bridge between the American Midwest and Southeast Asia. Meanwhile, a firm backed by TPG sealed a blue carbon investment deal with Indonesia, pointing to growing interest in the country's coastal ecosystems as a climate asset. Indonesia's sovereign wealth fund also formed a joint venture with the global meat company JBS, and together with Malaysia, Indonesia has been driving record growth in Islamic bonds. Even in technology, there is movement. The telecom company IOH received hundreds of millions in investment to build out AI infrastructure. Taken together, it is a picture of a country not standing still, but reaching carefully, deliberately into a wider world. Luxembourg is a small country, and it knows it. But these days, even small countries are finding ways to matter. This week, Luxembourg added another 8 million euros to Ukraine's energy support fund, bringing what it has given in total to 30 million euros. That money goes toward keeping lights on and heat running in a country where power grids have been deliberately targeted. For Luxembourg, it is not a vast sum, but it is a deliberate one, a quiet, repeated choice to show up again, rather than make one gesture and move on. The contribution sits alongside news that Luxembourg has also signed on to new alliance military projects, deepening its role in collective European defense. Neither decision is loud. There are no grand speeches attached, no headlines that shake the room. But together they paint a picture of a country that has decided steadiness is its particular strength. If you're still with me, consider this. Luxembourg has a population smaller than many cities you pass through without thinking. And yet it keeps finding its way onto the list of nations doing the unglamorous work, funding energy repairs, pooling defense research, showing up for the unflashy commitments that hold alliances together. 30 million euros for energy. New military projects signed, none of it dramatic, all of it consistent. And perhaps that is the point. In a world that rewards noise, Luxembourg seems to have settled on something else entirely. The value of simply being there, again and again when it counts. Republic of the Congo sits on the north bank of the Great River, the quieter neighbor in a busy region. These days, the louder story belongs across the water to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where President Tshisekedi has made a striking claim. He says a deal involving the Trump administration requires him to hold on to power for another term. The details are thin, and the claim itself raises more questions than it answers, but it lands on Congolese ears with a familiar weight. In Brazzaville, power has its own long history, and people have learned to listen carefully when leaders reach for reasons to stay. The river between the two Congos carries more than water. It carries family ties, trade, and the knowledge that what happens on one bank rarely stays there. A presidential claim in Kinshasa can echo through Brazzaville's markets and living rooms, not because it changes anything immediately, but because it reminds people how fragile the line is between stability and something else. If you're still with me, it is worth sitting with that for a moment. Not the politics of it, but the human texture. Ordinary people on both sides of this river have lived through decades when power changed hands badly, and decades when it did not change hands at all. They know the difference, even when the rest of the world is looking elsewhere. Tonight, the river moves slowly between two capitals, and the questions on either bank are quiet ones, the kind that settle into the air and stay. Malawi has done something its women's football team had never done before. They've reached the knockout stage of the Women's Africa Cup of Nations, and it's their first time even playing in the tournament. That detail matters. This isn't a side that's been here before and found their footing. They arrived for the first time, and they stayed. The Women's Africa Cup of Nations, WAFCON, is the continental championship for African women's football, and reaching the knockout round means Malawi finished among the top teams in their group and advanced past the opening stage. For a country whose women's program is still young, that's a quiet landmark. The Christian Science Monitor noted that the team has been on fire and that their run carries meaning beyond Malawi itself, a signal of where the women's game is growing across the continent. There's a specific name you'd want to know if you followed this team, a striker whose scoring has carried them through, but the details aren't here tonight. What's here is the shape of the story. A first appearance, a group stage survived, a knockout round earned. Somewhere in Malawi, people are following this with the kind of attention that first spring, the disbelief and then the settling in. The tournament continues. Malawi is still in it. Honduras sits between two seas and two continents, and for 8 years a quiet effort has been underway there to answer a simple question: what mammals, exactly, call this country home? The review is now complete, and it confirms 227 native mammal species. That is a remarkable number for a country roughly the size of Tennessee, and it reflects the layered geography that makes Honduras what it is. Caribbean coast to the north, Pacific lowlands to the south, and in between cloud forests and pine savannas and river valleys where an extraordinary range of creatures find shelter. 8 years is a long time to spend counting. It suggests patience, and it suggests care. People walking transects, setting camera traps, checking museum records, poring over field notes, making sure nothing was double counted or missed. The result is not a dramatic discovery, but something steadier and perhaps more valuable. A baseline, a clear picture of what is there, which is the first thing you need if you want to protect any of it. Honduras has known deforestation and pressure on its wild places as so much of Central America has. A document like this doesn't reverse that, but it gives the country a kind of mirror. Here's what we have. Here's what lives alongside us. If you're still with me, you might picture those cloud forests at dusk, the trees going dark, something small and furry moving through the understory. One of 227 reasons to pay attention. Colombia has a new president. His name is Abelardo de la Espriella, and this week he took the oath of office in a ceremony in the city of Cali, a departure from the usual setting of Bogotá, and one that observers have called historic for that reason alone. The ceremony marked the beginning of a presidency that, from its very first words, has set a clear and forceful direction. In his maiden speech, de la Espriella pledged a robust fight against crime and fiscal austerity, two promises that together sketch the outline of a harder, leaner approach to governing. He has vowed to take a firm line against armed groups, the kind of organizations that have shaped Colombia's countryside for decades, and his words suggest he intends to confront them rather than negotiate. He has also signaled a break from the previous administration's peace efforts, which is a significant shift in a country where the memory of those efforts is still fresh and still contested. Beyond Colombia's borders, there is a new alignment taking shape. De la Espriella is seen as an ally of the Trump administration in Washington, and reports indicate that a military partnership between the two countries is already being fast-tracked, aimed at drug traffickers. He takes office, as one analyst put it, with a head start in Washington. He also reflects a broader rightward shift across Latin America, where several countries have moved in a similar direction in recent years. For Colombia, the question now is what this harder line will mean for the countryside, for the cities, for the people who live with both the promise and the pressure of change. A new chapter has begun, and the country is watching it open. Romania has been doing something unusual on the Danube these days, sinking barges, 4 of them, filled with rock, sent down into the riverbed near the Cernavodă nuclear power plant. The reason is simple and urgent. The Danube is running low, and the plant's second reactor needs that water to keep operating. Cernavodă sits on the river in eastern Romania, and like a lot of nuclear plants, it draws cooling water from whatever flows past its doors. This year, not enough has been flowing. A punishing heat and drought across the region have pushed Danube levels down far enough that both Romania and Hungary have already had to trim nuclear output on their respective sides. Romania has been looking at steeper measures too, possibly curbing industrial power consumption, even suspending electricity exports if the drought deepens. So the barges are a kind of engineering improvisation, a way to deepen the channel and keep water moving toward the intake. You sink the vessel, the rock settles, the river finds a narrower path and runs a little deeper where you need it. It is not elegant, but it is the sort of thing people do when the river is not cooperating and the lights need to stay on. And the Danube, which has carried barges for centuries, is being asked to carry one more, this time not floating, but resting on the bottom, holding the line for a reactor and the people downstream of it. Austria sits at the center of Europe in more ways than one, landlocked, bordered by 8 neighbors, and long accustomed to being a country where things by and large work. Steady wages, steady institutions, a steady rhythm. So when a report from the OECD found that household income in Austria has taken a sharp downward turn, it landed with a particular kind of quiet, not a crisis, not a collapse, but a dip that people feel at the kitchen table, in the weekly shop, in the small decisions about what to buy and what to put back. What makes it stand out is the contrast. Across the OECD, that club of mostly wealthy nations, household income has been growing. Greece, still finding its footing after years of profound economic pain, saw the same decline as Austria. 2 very different countries arriving at the same place from opposite directions. Austria's credit rating remains strong. Its outlook is stable. The institutions that watch over the economy haven't flinched, but the distance between what the ratings say and what a family's budget feels like can be wide, and these days, that distance seems to be widening a little. If you're still with me, you might recognize the feeling, the sense that the numbers say one thing and your own life says another. Austria is no stranger to weathering difficult stretches. It has done so many times with a kind of stubborn composure. This dip will likely pass the same way. But for now, in homes across the country, people are adjusting, pulling in slightly, waiting to see what comes next. Madagascar has always carried its history in stone and wood, in the high places where kings once looked out over the central plateau. This week, there's word of a cultural offering that feels like a homecoming. A rebuilt palace, restored and reopened, paired with private art that hasn't been widely seen before. The details are still emerging, but the shape of the story is clear enough. A structure that once stood as a symbol of sovereignty has been brought back, and alongside it, works from private collections are being brought into public view. It's the kind of thing that doesn't make much noise. There are no crowds gathering, no speeches echoing through the streets, but for a country that has seen its heritage threatened by fire, by neglect, by the slow erosion of time, a rebuilt palace is more than a building. It's a refusal to forget. And the private art, whatever form it takes, painting or sculpture or something older, suggests that families and collectors have decided that what they've held close should now be shared. Madagascar is a place where the natural world gets most of the attention. The lemurs, the baobabs, the species that exist nowhere else on Earth. But there's a human story here too, layered and old, and it lives in these walls and canvases. If you're still with me, picture a quiet courtyard, late afternoon light falling on freshly laid stone, and the sense that something lost has been found again, not perfectly, not completely, but enough to pass on. That's worth carrying into the night. Tajikistan sits in a part of the world where winter is long and fuel is not a luxury but a necessity. And these days, the country is finding that the supplies it has long counted on from Russia are no longer arriving in the quantities they once did. It is not a crisis announced with alarm bells. It is more of a quiet recalibration, the kind that happens when a river you have depended on begins to run thinner and you start looking for other streams. What Tajikistan is doing, according to reports from the region, is turning more to its Central Asian neighbors for the fuel it needs. There is something natural about that. These are countries that share borders, share histories, share the same hard winters. The trade routes between them are old ones, and they are being used again with new purpose. But the story does not stop there. Tajikistan is also preparing to launch solar auctions, not small experiments, but a combined 400 megawatts of capacity. That is a serious commitment to the sun in a country that has no shortage of it. If you picture the high valleys and the wide skies of Tajikistan, you can imagine how much light falls on that land. And so the response to dwindling supplies from one direction is not just to find another supplier, but to begin building something that does not depend on any supplier at all. It is a slow turn and a practical one, and it says something about how a place adapts, not in panic, but with steady hands and an eye on the horizon. Switzerland has always kept its old certainties high in the mountains, the kind you could measure in ice that stayed put year after year. These days, that certainty is loosening. Heat waves are reshaping the country's glaciers, and the changes aren't subtle anymore. They're the sort of thing you can see from a trail, or from a village where people have watched the white line crawl back up the valley for as long as they can remember. The headline from Euronews names it plainly: heat waves are reshaping Switzerland's glaciers. And in the same breath of alpine news, there's a smaller signal that carries its own weight. SASFI has suspended summer skiing. That leaves only one glacier ski area open across the European Alps in the summer months. For a country that built whole seasons around the idea that the snow would hold, that's not just a logistical shift. It's a quiet farewell to something people assumed would always be there. If you've ever stood on a glacier, that ancient compressed blue-white silence, you know it doesn't feel like ordinary ground. It feels like time made visible. And when time starts moving faster, when the ice pulls back and the rock emerges beneath, it changes more than a ski season. It changes what a place understands about itself. Switzerland is still Switzerland. The peaks are still there, but the margins of the map are softer now, a little less frozen, a little more honest about what's coming. And up in those high valleys, people are watching carefully, steadily, the way you watch something you love, even when you can't hold it still. In Palestine, where the electricity supply has long been fragile and uncertain, health clinics are finding a quieter kind of reliability, one that comes from the sun. UNICEF has been working to equip Palestinian health clinics with clean, reliable solar energy, an effort that matters in places where power cuts can mean the difference between a vaccine staying cold or spoiling, between a baby being monitored properly or not at all. The details of how many clinics, how many panels, how many watts, those figures belong to the project reports. What carries into the night is something simpler. A clinic that once depended on an unpredictable grid can now keep its lights on, its refrigerators humming, its machines running because sunlight does what the infrastructure struggles to do, and in a place where so much has been disrupted, that steadiness is not small. Solar panels on a clinic roof don't resolve the larger conditions that make daily life so hard for so many Palestinians. They don't fix what is broken around them, but they do something real and immediate. They hold a line. A doctor can see patients after dark. A nurse can store medicine safely. A mother can bring her child to a place that feels for a moment like it will still be there tomorrow. If you're still with me, hold that image for a moment, a rooftop catching light and below it, a clinic doing its work, steady as it can. Panama sits at the narrow waist of the Americas, and for more than a century, its canal has let ships slip between two oceans without rounding the whole continent. These days, that passage is drawing fresh attention. Ryan Peterson, the chief executive of the freight company Flexport, has said the canal will be a big issue for shipping, a remark that carries weight coming from someone whose business depends on knowing where goods move and where they get stuck. He didn't spell out every detail, but the concern itself tells you something. When a canal that handles a meaningful share of world trade becomes uncertain, the ripples reach ports and warehouses far beyond Panama's shores. Drought has been the underlying pressure in recent years. The canal relies on freshwater lakes to lift and lower vessels, and when rainfall is scarce, fewer ships can pass. That simple fact, water in, ships through, connects Panama's weather to the price and timing of goods almost anywhere. And yet the canal endures. It has been deepened, widened, managed through dry seasons before the people who run it have spent years learning to do more with less water. If you're still with me, picture those locks at dusk, the gates swinging open, a freighter easing forward under its own enormous patience. The canal is not closing. It is adjusting, the way Panama always has, to the shape of the world around it. And the world, in turn, is being reminded just how much depends on this one narrow stretch of water. San Marino, the tiny republic folded into the hills of northern Italy, is once again looking for a song. The Dreaming San Marino Song Contest, the country's gateway to Eurovision, has opened submissions for the 2026 and 2027 editions, and casting dates are already on the calendar. For a nation of roughly 33,000 people, this is no small gesture. San Marino has been showing up at Eurovision for years now, punching well above its weight, and each season it opens its doors a little wider, inviting voices from beyond its borders to sing under its flag. The contest is part talent search, part national ritual, a way for a country you could drive across in under an hour to stand on a stage watched by tens of millions. And there's something else in the air these days too. San Marino's football clubs have been making noise in the Conference League, where one side was described as a light shining in San Marino before a hard-fought match ended in defeat. Sport, music. This little republic keeps finding ways to show up on the European stage, not always winning but always present. The casting calls will bring singers, dreamers, and hopefuls to a country smaller than most cities, and for a few weeks at least, San Marino will be listening. If you're still with me, hold that image, a small country with its doors open, waiting for a song. Portugal has drawn a little closer to something it's been working toward for a while now, the steady, unglamorous business of rebuilding after hard years. The country has secured just over €2 billion in European Union funding, which brings it close to 3/4 of the way toward its full recovery targets. That's not a headline that makes hearts race, but if you've been watching Portugal these last few years, you know how much quiet effort sits behind a number like that. The EU recovery program was designed to help member states invest in their futures, in greener energy, in digital infrastructure, in the kind of groundwork that doesn't always show up right away but changes the shape of things over time. For Portugal, reaching this milestone means a good portion of that promised support has now moved from commitment to reality. The money is landing. What remains is the harder part, spending it well on time, in ways that actually reach the communities and industries that need it. There's a rhythm to this kind of work. It doesn't move in dramatic leaps. It moves the way a long coastline moves when you're driving south from Porto toward Lisbon, steadily, mile by mile, until you realize how far you've come. If you're still with me, that's where Portugal stands tonight. Not at the finish line, but well past the halfway mark, with the road ahead still clearly in view. Samoa sits out in the blue middle of the Pacific, a nation whose people have always measured their wealth in water as much as in land. These days, that relationship has taken on a new and quietly remarkable form. Samoa has already done something many larger nations are still only talking about. It has set aside 30% of its ocean territory as protected space, not a goal for some future decade, not a pledge still waiting on paperwork. Done, achieved, already in place, and now scientists have been exploring those waters, working alongside the country to understand what lives there and what that protection means in practice. The details of their findings aren't fully known yet, but the spirit of the work is clear. It is about listening to the ocean before deciding what comes next. For a small island nation, a commitment like this carries real weight. 30% of a country's ocean is a vast stretch of sea, reef, and deep water, currents, and quiet places where fish have moved for centuries. Protecting it means choosing restraint over short-term gain. It means trusting that what stays untouched will keep giving back to the reefs, to the fisheries, to the families who live along the coast. If you're still with me, picture that water tonight, warm, wide, and, at least in those protected parts, left largely to itself. Samoa made a promise to the sea, and then quietly kept it. Turkmenistan sits on some of the largest natural gas reserves in the world, and for years now most of what flows out has gone east, to China, through pipelines that stretch across Central Asia. It has been a steady arrangement, a reliable buyer, and a reliable supplier. But these days, Ashgabat is looking at the map again, thinking about other directions. There is talk of reviving an old idea, a project that would carry Turkmen gas across the Caspian Sea to Azerbaijan and then onward toward Europe. Romania has been part of that conversation, along with Georgia, which has been drawing closer to Turkmenistan in what observers are calling an emerging strategic axis. None of this is sudden. It is the slow work of diplomacy, meetings, feasibility studies, careful wording, but the intention is clear. Turkmenistan would like its gas to reach more than one destination, and European countries, for their part, have been looking for new suppliers, thinking about energy routes that do not pass through the places they used to rely on. So there is a quiet alignment of interests forming, stretching from the eastern shore of the Caspian all the way to the Black Sea. Whether it moves quickly or not is another question. These things take time, and pipelines are built slowly, if they are built at all. But the conversations are happening, and the map is being studied with fresh eyes. If you're still with me, that is the story from Turkmenistan tonight. A country thinking about where its future flows. Kuwait sits at the northern edge of the Gulf, a small country whose wealth runs deep beneath the sand and out through the Strait of Hormuz. These are uneasy days in the region. There is conflict nearby, and the narrow waterway that carries Kuwait's oil to the world has been disrupted enough that Kuwait has had to declare force majeure on some shipments, a formal way of saying circumstances have moved beyond anyone's control. Exports have halted, growth has slowed. By some reckonings, Kuwait is among the war's biggest economic losers, and yet the rating agency Fitch has looked at Kuwait and affirmed its standing at AA-. That is a high grade, the kind reserved for borrowers whose foundations are solid even when the ground is shaking. The reason is straightforward. Kuwait holds vast financial assets accumulated over years of careful stewardship, and those reserves are large enough to absorb shocks that would buckle other economies. It doesn't remove the pressure. Ships still can't move freely. Air defense contracts are being awarded. Missiles are being sold to Gulf states, Kuwait among them. The region is arming, watching, waiting. But underneath the noise, there is something steadier. A country that saved when it could, and now finds that those savings are doing what savings are meant to do, holding the line, buying time. If you're still with me, that's worth carrying into the night. Not as comfort exactly, but as a reminder that some things built carefully over time can hold. Iraq has long carried a burden that most countries never have to think about, the question of who holds a gun and in whose name. For years, armed factions have operated outside the formal security forces, some tied to neighboring Iran, some shaped by older wars and older loyalties. The state has struggled to gather all of that back into a single authority. Now Iraq's ruling coalition has backed a deadline to bring weapons under state control. It's a quiet but significant step, a political promise that the only armed force in the country should be the country's own. The context is not simple. Some Iran-backed factions have grown smaller and more secretive, adapting rather than disappearing. Regional pressure pulls Iraq in several directions at once, toward Tehran, toward Damascus, toward Washington. each with its own expectations. And ordinary Iraqis live inside that pull, navigating daily life while powers around them negotiate. So a deadline matters, not because deadlines alone change facts on the ground, but because they name a direction. They say the state and not the faction. If you're still with me, you might sit with that for a moment, a country trying to gather its own strength into its own hands, knowing the road is long and choosing to walk it anyway. That's the story from Iraq tonight. Lebanon has been talking with Israel through intermediaries about the things that hold a country together after a long season of war. The word from Lebanese officials is that there has been what they call positive progress on two difficult questions, where the borders sit and who is coming home from prison. These are not conversations that happen face to face. They move slowly through go-betweens, and the fact that both sides are still at the table, still finding language they can agree on, is itself something worth noticing. There's also word that Lebanon and Israel have settled on a short list of countries that could send troops to verify the disarmament of Hezbollah. That detail matters because it suggests someone is thinking about what comes after the talking, about who stands in the room and watches, and whether that watching can be trusted. All of this unfolds against a backdrop that is hard to hold in the mind. Lebanon's health ministry has recorded more than 4,300 deaths from Israeli attacks since early March. Each of those numbers was a person, in a family, in a town that knew their name. So when officials speak of progress, they are speaking into a grief that has not finished settling. And yet the talks continue. Borders drawn more carefully, prisoners named for return, a short list of countries, not yet chosen, but at least agreed to exist, small steps in a long and heavy walk. If you're still with me, we'll move on now and let Lebanon rest for the night. Morocco sits at the northwest corner of Africa, close enough to Europe that you can see Spain across the water on a clear day, and close enough to Algeria that the two countries share more than 1,000 kilometers of border. They share history, faith, language, Amazigh roots, and yet that border, for decades now, has been mostly closed. The rivalry between Morocco and Algeria is one of those stories that never quite resolves. It shifts shape. Sometimes it is about territory, sometimes about influence in the wider region, sometimes about alliances far from home. Analysts describe it as a kind of slow contest, each country watching the other, each building relationships elsewhere to strengthen its hand. These days it touches everything from energy politics to football. And meanwhile, Morocco finds itself pulled in another direction entirely, northward. A surge of migration across the Strait of Gibraltar toward the Spanish enclave of Ceuta has rattled European capitals and embarrassed Rabat. Courts have begun handing down sentences. 7 taxi drivers jailed in what their union calls a harsh first ruling. Spanish authorities watch social media for signs of another crossing. So Morocco stands at a kind of crossroads, pressed between an old rivalry to the east and a new crisis to the north, carrying the weight of both. If you're still with me, we'll let Morocco rest there for now and move on. Grenada, the small island nation tucked in the southern Caribbean, has terminated its energy contract with Global Petroleum Group. The details are sparse, but the decision marks a turning point for a country that has long wrestled with how to power its economy sustainably and affordably. Energy in Grenada, as in much of the Caribbean, is a delicate matter. These islands rely heavily on imported fuel, and the cost of keeping the lights on can weigh heavily on households and businesses alike. Any shift in an energy arrangement, then, is not just a bureaucratic move. It touches daily life. The termination of this contract suggests that Grenada's government felt the arrangement with Global Petroleum Group was no longer serving the country's interests, though the specific reasons have not been made public. What comes next is the quieter part of the story, the part that unfolds in meetings and planning documents and conversations among engineers. Grenada has spoken before about wanting to move toward renewable energy, toward solar and geothermal, and the natural advantages that come with sitting in the tropics. Whether this termination opens a door in that direction or simply closes one is something only time will clarify. For now, a small nation has made a deliberate choice about its own energy future, and that choice, in its way, carries the weight of sovereignty. If you're still with me, we'll let that settle for a moment before we move on. Oman has long sat at the narrow mouth of the Persian Gulf, where the Strait of Hormuz carries a vast share of the world's oil and commerce through waters no wider than a river bend. These days, Muscat is doing what it has often done, quietly bringing parties to the table. Iran says it has reached an agreement with Oman on shipping through the strait, and American officials have echoed that a deal is expected soon. The details are still settling. Iran is reportedly waiting on Security Council approval, and the negotiations have stretched across weeks, with Oman holding the thread between Tehran and Washington. It's the kind of work Oman has built a reputation for patient, face-to-face diplomacy in a region where most others speak past each other. The strait itself is a place of enormous consequence. Millions of barrels pass through it every day, and any disruption ripples outward to fuel prices and supply chains far from these shores. For now, the signals from all sides suggest movement toward reopening and easing tensions, though nothing is finalized until the last signatures land. If you're still with me, picture Muscat at dusk, the harbor lights coming on, the dhows rocking at anchor, and somewhere in a quiet room, people still talking, still pushing towards something that holds. It may not make the loudest story of the week, but it's the one carrying real weight into the night. Vanuatu sits in a stretch of the Pacific where the earth still moves and the cyclones still come, and the people of Tanna Island have long known this better than most. So there is a particular kind of quiet satisfaction in the news that new evacuation centers on Tanna have now been completed, built at a cost of 84 million Vatu. These are not glamorous buildings, they are shelters, practical, sturdy places meant to hold people safe when the weather turns violent or the ground shakes. On an island where Mount Yasser rumbles steadily in the south, and the cyclone season arrives each year with familiar dread, having a designated place to go is not a luxury. It is the difference between waiting out a storm in fear and waiting it out with a roof overhead. The figure, 84 million Vatu, tells you something about scale. Not enormous by international standards, but meaningful here, where every Vatu represents a decision about what matters most. Tanna is a place of extraordinary landscapes and close-knit communities where custom and daily life are woven together tightly. These centers will sit among villages and gardens, probably quiet most days of the year, until the day they are suddenly everything. And that, perhaps, is the best you can say about disaster preparedness. You build something and hope it stays unused, and you are grateful either way. If you're still with me, we'll move on now, slowly to our next stop. In Nepal, they did something remarkable. They brought the tigers back. For years, the country's tiger population had been thinning. Fewer of them in the grasslands and forests, fewer of those low, patient figures moving through the tall grass, and Nepal decided that wasn't acceptable. Conservation efforts took hold. The numbers began to climb again, a quiet kind of restoration, the kind that takes patience and a willingness to let wild space stay wild. But here's where the story turns, as stories often do. The tigers came back, and now the question is how to live with them. Because the same landscapes where tigers roam are also where people farm, where children walk to school, where livestock graze near the edge of the forest. A growing tiger population is a conservation success, yes, but it is also a neighbor problem, and Nepal is grappling with that tension honestly. Not pretending the tigers are simply a symbol on a poster, but acknowledging they are large, powerful animals sharing ground with communities that have their own lives and fears and needs. The work now is finding the balance, how to protect what was brought back without asking too much of the people who live beside it. It's the kind of challenge that doesn't have a single answer. It asks for listening, for creativity, for the slow work of coexistence. And if you're still with me, you might sense something familiar in that. The way bringing something back is only the beginning. The harder part is learning to share the land and the night with what returns. Peru and Mexico have quietly mended a rupture that lasted more than 3 years. The two countries severed diplomatic relations in late 2022 during a political crisis in Lima that saw Peru's president removed from office and then detained. Mexico offered asylum to that politician, a move Peru's government regarded as interference in its internal affairs. Embassies were shuttered, accusations traveled back and forth across the Pacific, and for a long while, two nations that shared deep historical and cultural bonds simply stopped talking at the official level. Now, that silence has ended. Diplomatic ties have been formally restored, and both governments have signaled a willingness to move forward. The details of what broke the stalemate remain largely between them, but the result is clear enough. Embassies will reopen, ambassadors will return. The ordinary machinery of two neighboring republics, trade agreements, consular services, cultural exchanges can begin turning again. It's easy to forget how much quietly depends on two governments simply being willing to sit in the same room. When that thread breaks, it's not just ministers who feel it. It's families with paperwork to sort, businesses with shipments waiting, students with plans caught in between. Peru has had no shortage of difficult chapters these past few years, political and otherwise. So the restoration of a diplomatic bridge, even one born of necessity, carries a certain weight. Nothing dramatic, nothing solved overnight. Just two countries deciding after a long pause that talking is better than not talking. And sometimes that's where the real work begins. And that's the world for tonight. Wherever you are, whatever tomorrow holds, rest easy. The world will keep turning slowly while you sleep, and we'll take another quiet trip around it tomorrow night. Good night.